The air at the STT, Jude's vocational academy for boys, was thick with the smell of hot metal, sawdust, and cheap cigarette smoke during stolen moments behind the dumpsters. This wasn't a place for poets or philosophers. It was a factory for forging boys into men, or at least into functioning cogs for the factories and workshops that line the river. The head of this factory, the man who kept the machinery of discipline running, was the school's director, Mr. Corrigan. Mr. Corrigan was not a principal in the modern sense. He was a former factory foreman, a man with steel gray hair, hands like worn leather, and a deep-seated belief that the only lesson that truly mattered was the one that prepared a boy for the harsh, unforgiving reality of the world. He saw his students not as budding geniuses, but as raw, flawed material that needed to be hammered into shape. 17-year-old Leo was one of those boys. He wasn't a bad kid, just a boy adrift in a sea of testosterone and teenage apathy. He had learned early that in the noisy, brutal world of the vocational school, respect was earned not through grades, but through a kind of quiet, confident defiance. His latest venture into that world was a small, illicit gambling ring in the back of the metal shop during the lunch hour. It was nothing serious. Pitching pennies against the grimy brick wall, a few crumpled dollar bills changing hands. It was a way to kill time, a way to feel like a big shot in a world that was designed to make you feel small. The metal shop was a cavern of noise and shadows. The shriek of the lathe, the percussive bang of hammers on steel, the hiss of welding torches. It was the perfect cover. Leo and his small crew were huddled in the far corner, their backs to the door, completely absorbed in their game. The glint of coins on the greasy concrete floor was their entire world. "Come on, Lucky Seven," one boy whispered, shaking a pair of dice in his cupped hands. Leo was leaning against the wall, a cigarette tucked behind his ear, feeling like a king. He was up $5. In the world of STT, Jude's, that made him a wealthy man. He was so lost in the small drama of the game that he didn't notice the change in the atmosphere. He didn't notice the rhythmic clang of the hammer at the nearest workstation suddenly stopping. He didn't notice the shadow that fell over their small circle. He only knew something was wrong when he looked up and saw the other boys' faces, their cocky smirks frozen and then melting away into pale, slack-jawed fear. He turned slowly. Mr. Corrigan was standing right behind them. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. His face was a mask of pure, weary resignation. He just stood there, his presence sucking all the rebellious energy out of the corner, leaving only a cold, quiet dread. He looked down at the dice and the crumpled bills on the floor. He then looked at the other boys. "Get back to work," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was not to be disobeyed. The boys scrambled away, leaving Leo alone with the director. Mr. Corrigan's eyes, the color of a winter sky, finally settled on Leo. He didn't say anything about the gambling. He just pointed with his chin toward the cigarette tucked behind Leo's ear. "You know the rules, son." The director turned and walked away, his heavy work boots echoing on the concrete. He didn't need to say anything else. The verdict had already been delivered. After the final bell, Leo was to report to his office. The rest of the school day was a special kind of torture. The dread of the coming appointment, a heavy, physical weight in the pit of his stomach. He knew what happened in Mr. Corrigan's office. Everyone did. Mr. Corrigan's office was not a place of comfort. It was a small, practical room with a steel desk, 2 hard chairs, and a single, grime-streaked window that looked out over the factory smokestacks. It smelled of stale coffee and industrial soap. When Leo knocked and entered, Mr. Corrigan was sitting at his desk, signing a stack of disciplinary reports. He didn't look up. "Sit," he said. Leo sat, his hands sweating, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. Mr. Corrigan finished signing the last report, capped his pen with a deliberate click, and leaned back in his chair. He finally looked at Leo. "I don't even know your name, son," he said, his voice flat. "And that's the tragedy. You're just another one. Another face in a long line of fools who thinks the rules are for someone else." He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Do you have any idea what we are trying to do here? We are trying to give you boys a trade, a skill, something you can use to build a life so you don't end up on a factory floor earning minimum wage for the next 50 years. And you repay that effort by wasting your time, wasting your money, and breaking the rules for a cheap thrill." "It was just a game, sir," Leo whispered. "It is always just a game. Mr. Corrigan replied, his eyes cold. Until you're out there in the real world, and just a game gets you fired. Just a game gets you a criminal record. I am not preparing you for a life of games. I am preparing you for a life of work. And work requires discipline. He stood up and walked over to the corner of the office. Leaning there was a long, thin, and flexible rattan cane, its polished surface worn smooth from years of use. It was not an object of anger. It was a tool of the trade. This is not going to change you, the director said, a note of profound cynicism in his voice as he picked up the cane. I have no illusions about that. You will be back in this office before the month is out, for this or for some other act of foolishness. But it is my job to enforce the consequences. It is the only language some of you understand. Hands on the desk. A wave of cold fear washed over Leo. He slowly stood and walked to the front of the steel desk, placing his hands flat on its cold surface. Mr. Corrigan stood beside him. The punishment was swift, impersonal, and brutally efficient. Whack! The cane came down across Leo's outstretched knuckles with a sharp, whistling crack. An explosion of white-hot electric pain shot up his arm. He cried out, pulling his hand back instinctively. Both hands on the desk, Mr. Corrigan commanded, his voice unchanged, trembling. Leo placed his hand back on the desk. Whack! The second strike landed on his other hand. He gritted his teeth, tears of pure, unadulterated pain springing to his eyes. That, the director said, his voice a low monotone, is for the gambling. And this, whack, is for the cigarette. Now get out of my office. You're wasting my time. Leo stumbled back, cradling his hands to his chest, the knuckles already swelling and turning a dark red. He didn't say a word. He just turned and fled the office, the genuine tears of a boy who had just learned a hard physical lesson streaming down his face. He didn't go home right away. He walked to the edge of the school grounds, by the rusty chain-link fence that overlooked the river and the factories. He sat on the damp grass, his hands throbbing with a deep, aching pain. He looked at the factories, at the smoke pouring from their stacks, and he thought about Mr. Corrigan's weary, cynical words. The director was right. The punishment probably hadn't changed him, not deep down. But as he sat there, feeling the real, physical cost of his own stupidity, something did shift. It wasn't a grand revelation. It was just a small, quiet, and painful understanding. He was not a king. He was not a big shot. He was just another boy in a long, long line, and the world was a much harder place than he had ever imagined. And for the first time, that felt like a lesson worth learning.